because man's task is to make the earth after the model of heaven. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Man's project is to heavenize the earth. Man is made to transform the world from glory to glory, to take hold of it and break it down and remake it after the image of heaven.
Welcome back to the Reformed Reset. My name is Grant, and guys, on this episode, I have the great privilege of having Dr. Joe Rigney join me on this for an interview. Dr. Rigney, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, glad to be here, Grant.
All right, awesome. I'm really looking forward to this. Guys, please subscribe. Hit the button right now. Hit the bell so you get notified. Hit the like button. Leave a comment. Let us know what you thought about the interview. We would love to hear from you. Plus, all of those things tells YouTube to put this video in front of new listeners. So you gotta work with that YouTube algorithm, guys. And it's really that's the game we gotta play. So I appreciate it if you guys do that. Go down in the description below, guys. All of our social media, our email, takeholdstudios@gmail.com. You can email us, but also I'm gonna have links to Dr. Rigney's works, all of his different books. There's a whole slew of them, and even the new book that's coming out, which we'll talk about in a minute. All of that will be in the description below. So make sure you go down there and click on all of it and check all of that stuff out. We greatly appreciate it. Okay, I want to just jump right into it. So again, Dr. Rigney, thank you for coming on. Could you please just give us a little snapshot bio of yourself, your ministry, work, and all that sort of thing so people can get to know you a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, so I originally from West Texas, grew up in Midland, and grew up in a Baptist church. There was saved when I was about 12, and then went to college at Texas A&M, which is where I kind of first got into reformed theology through the ministry of John Piper. It's also where I met my wife. We got married right after I graduated, basically, when we had moved up to Minnesota to be a part of the Bethlehem Institute, which eventually became Bethlehem College and Seminary. So I went to seminary at Bethlehem and then stuck around because Bethlehem was starting up a college program and then expanding the seminary, and I was in the right place at the right time. And so for about 18 years, I did that. I was a professor at Bethlehem teaching Christian worldview, theology, literature. I oversaw, history of ideas program for a while, and then became president for a couple of years. And then as of last summer, I took a position out here in Moscow at New St. Andrews. And so I teach freshman theology here, as well as literature, things like that. And also do some stuff at the church. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of the whistle stop tour from Texas to Minnesota to Idaho.
You mentioned children. How many kids you have?
Yeah, I've got 3 boys, 14, 12, and 5 currently.
Nice. That's awesome. The time in Minnesota, was pastoring always a part of the teaching, or does that come later?
Yeah, it came later. So in 2015, some of my closest friends actually and I planted a church out of Bethlehem in kind of on the east side of Minneapolis, and then eventually in St. Paul. We moved to St. Paul, called Cities Church, and I was a pastor there from 2015 until last summer. And so we planted a church there. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for sharing that. That's really good. So I really wanted to start off talking about a land that I love, and that it seems you love a whole ton as well, Narnia. You've written a book called Live Like a Narnian, but I first want to ask, what was your introduction to C.S. Lewis? Was it Narnia? Was it nonfiction? Are you a fan of all of it? Tell us about how you grew in this love for Lewis.
Yeah, so I don't remember the first journey in. My memory is not very good about that sort of thing, but I know we had Narnia as a kid, so I'm fairly sure my mom gave it to me. I actually she had like it's the American edition, I think, basically that goes in the correct order. So it was, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then Prince Caspian and Magician's Nephew was way down there at the end at number 6. So I had one of those. So I remember reading those. Probably when my mom may have read it to me. I don't actually remember, but that kind of got me into them. Sometime when I was probably 12 or 13, I read Mere Christianity. So late junior high, early high school, maybe 13, 14, somewhere in there. And that was a kind of intellectual firecracker. Like it just kind of, I had never thought about things that way and realizing like, oh, wow. And so I remember trying to explain Lewis's argument from the moral law to my parents and totally bungling it. But I was so excited about it. I was like, I don't know how to explain this, but this is amazing. It makes sense, but I can't make it make sense to you. They tolerated it. It was great. So then kept reading in college. I would periodically read Narnia in college. I know I had one on my shelf. And then what kind of like jump started things again, or what sent me back, I think I'd read, Screw Tape and various and sundry other things over the years. But in like '08, I read Michael Ward's Planet Narnia.
Okay.
And so in reading Ward, it really kind of stimulated just kind of the bigness of Lewis's world. So I started teaching classes at Bethlehem on Narnia. So I did that a couple of times. And so that's where Live Like a Narnian came from. It was the first book I wrote, and it just kind of emerged out of this love for Lewis. And then from there, what's funny is because of Narnia, Live Like a Narnian, I got invited to contribute to Theologians on the Christian Life, a series of books that Crossway did. And so I did Lewis on the Christian Life,
nice.
which is basically my everything other than Narnia. So there's a little bit of Narnia in that one, but it's largely Screw Tape Letters, Letters to Malcolm, Great Divorce, Till We Have Faces, Mere Christianity, Miracles. It's all of that stuff and a bunch of essays and letters. So it's the sort of what Lewis cared about on the Christian life. And so that kind of has, I guess, established, like, now people are like, so you're a C.S. Lewis scholar. And I'm like, I don't think I can say that, but I guess sort of. I mean, I've written 2 books on him and teach lots of classes. So yeah, I guess that does. I guess I am. So there we go.
That's really good. So similarly, I think my mom read them all to us, but I grew up I loved Narnia. I don't remember, it's like similar to always knowing that I've loved the Lord. I've grown up knowing I've always loved Narnia. We had if you watch the old BBC versions of
the movie, like not the cartoon, the actual animatronic ones.
Yeah. With the real good special effects.
Yes.
Yeah. Those I applaud them because they pretty much followed the book word for word,
Yeah, they tried to be faithful back then.
Yeah. So
now they're like, no.
That's right. Yeah, not doing that. What do you think the value, or maybe what value have you drawn from the intersection of truth and storytelling and how that helps you communicate theological concepts?
Yeah, so I've taught theology and literature now for years. And one of the things I think literature does is it gives you, Lewis thought this, he thinks nature does this, and he thinks books do this. They give you an iconography, they give you a language of images.
Nice.
And so they give you characters by which we sort of make sense of stuff. And so I found over the years in teaching, not just Lewis, but, Pride and Prejudice and Dante and whatever else, that when I taught it to students and then they would end up in my office for, pastoral counsel, that the ability to sort of point at a character and say, okay, remember this scene, remember this issue, that's going to help shed light. And like pennies would drop. People would go, oh, like they could begin to see themselves in the characters, or see someone else that they're having a conflict with somebody, and that person's being like this, and they would go, oh. And so I found that true for my own life as I read. I just actually taught to my freshmen here at NSA. We just did Great Divorce in freshman theology to talk about the Christian life. And a lot of it is, it's amazing. A lot of it was just me reading these interactions and then, making a few comments, but it does so much of the work for you when you see the actual lived out version. It kind of makes certain things more clear. So I think that that's one of the fundamental things that literature storytelling does, and that's true of books. It's also true of movies. It's true of all sorts of art. That kind of helps you to kind of get out of yourself and see the world from a different vantage, and therefore you're able to see yourself better.
Yeah. And truth is truth, whether it's in the form of the story of a character or if it's a proverb or something. And you know, you can say whether you have or not, but I've read along with my kids many of N.D. Wilson's
Yeah.
book series. And with my son, I have a son who's 12. There's been several times, just like what you're saying, it's helped me in parenting because I'm reading along with him. I say, do you remember what Cyrus did? When
Yeah.
he did this for Antigone, or, and I'm
Yeah.
like drawing out,
Yep.
events where he was courageous or he didn't fight. He protected or whatever.
Yep.
And,
Yeah, that's exactly right.
so it is really, really helpful and powerful. So in light of that, what might be your counsel to the guy? And I've encountered this a lot. And I'm not sure if it's a regional thing or generational or what have you, but I've encountered a lot of men who might be fine reading the systematic theology, or they might be fine reading, some other works similar to that. But when it comes to fiction, that's girly. That I just don't like it. I just don't like it. And they have this kind of strong aversion. How do you counsel? What do you say to something like that?
Yeah. So the accusation that reading novels or literature is girly and effeminate is a cope. That's you don't like it, and so you need to come up with a reason why you don't like it. And so calling something girly allows you to do it. Because the reality is, God's a storyteller. So God thinks stories are important. He tells them all the time. So if you don't like stories, then what are you saying about God, who apparently really does in real life? And we think about the scriptures largely has lots of stories. It's not just God didn't just give us a book of maxims and theological, affirmations and denials or something like that. It's not just laws. Like the laws themselves are embedded in a story. And that story is both, it's told and then it's picked up, and sort of the next version of it is a little bit different. And so you see the same sort of themes and the same plots reused and twisted, and you're meant to learn to read and see the similarities. And then you have things with Nathan with David, where the mechanism that God used to show David himself was not, Nathan could have walked in there and said, God told me that you slept with Bathsheba and killed Uriah. God hates that. How dare you? He could have done that. That's a prophet thing. He could have done the Elijah with Ahab thing. And instead he comes in and goes, I'm going to sneak around the back. I'm going to tell the story, awaken David's emotions, have him identify with someone in the story, right? And awaken a sense of justice, a sense of righteousness by telling a story about a rich man who steals a poor little lamb from a poor man. And I'm going to awaken that sense of justice, and then I'm going to drop the hammer. And it's effective. God uses it to break David and turn him from his sin. And so it seems like God values stories as that's how God uses them. He helps us to narrate our experience. He helps us to see ourselves. And that can be true of, reading history books. So my wife actually, she doesn't read as much fiction, but she loves history books. So she loves reading stuff that really happened and really well told history books. And I love fantasy and sci-fi and stuff like that. If we had to choose, we often wouldn't choose the same genre, right? She would choose the historical stuff. I'd choose the fiction. Yeah. But we're both going to them for similar reasons, which is this sheds light on reality. This sheds light. There's things for us to learn about reality. And so for a guy to say, I'm not going to learn it there, just feels a little bit like, well, you're robbing yourself of a gift. Yeah. God's a storyteller. So you ought to, this is something you should grow in. I have a friend actually who for years didn't do it. It was his kids. Once he had kids, he realized this is a defect in me, that I don't like reading these stories, that I don't like fiction. And he's a pastor, and he's intentionally sought to like expand his taste and range so that he can appreciate it. And I think it's been a benefit to him in that regard.
That's really cool. I didn't intentionally not read fiction for many years, but I think I just got caught up in the, if you're Reformed, you just read Puritans, or if you're Reformed, you read, theology books. But when I started picking it up again, and a lot of it had to do with N.D. Wilson stuff and reading with my kids,
Uh-huh.
I was actually surprised at how much value for communicating and just seeing the world and all those other things that you were just saying. All of that started to come out. And something came to mind when God rebukes Israel in the prophets. Sometimes he says things like, sometimes he calls them Sodom, or calls them Egypt, or calls them things. Well, that doesn't mean anything unless you know the story.
Exactly.
And
exactly right.
Yeah. So that just occurred to me. That sounds pretty cool. So you wrote Live Like a Narnian. You often quote the wonderful line from King Loon.
Yep.
So if you don't mind telling us the wonderful line, because it's one of those things that if you say it at the right moment, it almost brings you to tears because it's so beautiful. And also, so what do you mean by live like a Narnian?
Yeah. So the line from Loon is, "This is what it means to be a king, to be first in every desperate attack, to be last in every desperate retreat. And when there's hunger in the land, it must be now and again in bad years, to wear finer clothes and laugh louder at a scantier meal than any man in your land," which I then summarize as first in, last out, laughing loudest.
Yeah.
That's my shorthand of Loon's definition of kingship, which I think is a definition of masculinity more broadly. So I think this is what he's giving a picture of masculinity. You're first in, the burden falls on you first. It falls on you longest, so you'll be the last out, and you do it with joy and a twinkle in your eye because you're trusting in God and not despairing.
Yeah.
So I use that a lot in everywhere, all sorts of places. I think was the second part of the question was about
what does it really mean to live like a Narnian?
So live like a Narnian.
Yeah.
So live like a Narnian is another way of saying live like a Christian. So live like a Narnian comes from Puddleglum in Silverchair, who says, I'm on Aslan's side. If there's no Aslan to lead it, I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there's no Narnian. And it's in the middle of this sort of battle with the Green Witch, and when she's trying to lull them to sleep and make them forget what they know to be true, that forget Narnia, to forget Aslan, to forget everything above the ground because they're underground. And Puddleglum puts his foot in the fire, and in this sort of defiant moment of faith says, "No, I'm living like a Narnian, and that's how I'm gonna." And we're leaving, taking it, thank you for the supper. We're leaving, and we're going to go search for Overland for the rest of our lives. We're looking for the heavenly country. So living like a Narnian is a way of saying living like a faithful Christian. And so that's what I was seeking to do with the book, is think about discipleship through the lens of Narnia. How does it help us to see ourselves, to go into the wardrobe, and then to come back out more faithful, to see sin in all its ugliness, to see goodness in all of its beauty and attractiveness, and to have courage, sort of smack us in the face and it become a part of us. That was the goal in writing the book, was to draw out the biblical roots of what Lewis accomplishes in these 7 novels.
I want to ask you a quick question about Jonathan Edwards later, but that line, or some of what you were just describing with Puddleglum's moment there, reminding me of one of the resolutions, and I may get this wrong, but it's living for God, and if no one else does, I still will.
Yeah. Right.
That's super good. That that kind of Christian resilience, I guess you could say, is so helpful in life. Okay, fun question about Narnia. If you could have one character from Narnia be your sidekick, who would it be and why?
Okay, and I'm not going to say Aslan because that's a Jesus juke. and he is my side, sidekick's probably not the right word for that. But so I won't do that. Man, so it depends on what kind of movie am I in. Is it, actually maybe it doesn't. So Reepicheep would be super fun to have as a sidekick. because he's a riot, and would be all kinds of fun, getting all sorts of trouble with Reapy Cheap. Puddle Glum would also be very good because for similar reasons, but sort of opposite, right? So Reapy Cheap's sort of daring, dauntless swagger, and honor on the one hand versus Puddle Glum's realism and would be a good, dose of sober-mindedness every day of your life.
Yeah.
And so I think, Puddle Glum would be pretty fun to have as a buddy. And
That's good.
and yeah, that's probably who I'd pick.
I was telling my wife before I came up here to do this, and I said I'm gonna ask a fun question. I told her the question. She was like, hands down, Reaper Cheap. Yeah, that's what she was like, easy.
Easy. That's right. That's right.
I was like, oh, we'll see what he says. It's really funny. All right, so transitioning a little bit, and if you can connect the two, that'd be great. But you have written and spoken quite a bit on on empathy and even the sin of empathy. Now, I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's because you just have a general dislike for everyone else's feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably something deeper here. What is it that prompted you into this study? Is it connected to this living like a Narnian thing?
It's less Narnia, although there may be, if I were to think about it, I'm sure that there are some where folks get sulky and manipulative. Edmund in the first book kind of does some of that.
Yeah.
But so some of the roots are in a guy named Edwin Friedman. We can talk about him in a minute because I've got a book coming out related to leadership and things like that. But the Lewis connection is actually Great Divorce. So one of the things about the Great Divorce, which is Lewis's version of Dante's Inferno, effectively.
Yeah.
He's updating Dante for the 20th century in England, and where you have those souls in hell can take a excursion to heaven and choose to stay or not. And so they come there and they're going to meet with a solid spirit, a heavenly spirit, a saint, and that saint's going to try to help them to make the right choice. Basically, the choice is central. Like, what are you putting, God at the center or yourself at the center? That's the choice. Well, one of the recurring things that you see as Lewis kind of exaggerates features of our own life and shows, kind of draws caricatures that exaggerate true features of our existence, is the way that the ghosts in Great Divorce manipulate or attempt to manipulate the feelings of others. Okay, so there's a number of them do it, and the solid spirits are immune to it. They can't be manipulated this way anymore, but we're not. And so the use of pity as a form of blackmail. So at a practical level, when someone throws a pity party in order to get their way, someone sulks in order to get their way, is a good example of taking something that God meant for good, which is this person sad. So the biblical command is to weep with those who weep and to rejoice with those who rejoice. So, sharing the emotions is a good and fitting thing in its proper place. But that's only true if it's tethered to reality. It's tethered to truth. If it's oriented toward their actual good and not just tethered to their feelings, which may be really, really bad. Their passions may be out of whack.
Yeah.
And so one of the principles I learned from Lewis is, this is from Four Loves, is all natural loves are good and they have their place, but when they become gods, they become demonic.
Mm-hmm.
So when a good thing goes wrong, when it sets itself up as a god, it becomes demonic. So love ceases to be a demon love ceases to be demonic only when it ceases to be a god. Love becomes demonic when it becomes a god, when it claims divine prerogatives. And Four Loves, Lewis talks about love of family, for example, love of friendship, romantic love, and how all of these can become demonic, become strong. Well, the love of the hurting, so what we typically call compassion or pity, is a good thing. It's a great virtue, which means if it ever goes wrong, it's going to be a really, really nasty vice. It's going to be really, really awful. Yeah. And that's what Lewis is showing in Great Divorce, is the way that good impulse of pity can be used by evil people to steer others, to get their way, to manipulate, to blackmail, emotionally blackmail people. And so that actually was some of the background for my forays into the sin of empathy, was a recognition that compassion and sympathy are both biblical virtues. They're good. It's a good thing. And yet, like all good things, it can be corrupted.
Yeah.
And how does it go wrong, and why is it effective? And so to try to shed light on those sort of dynamics, I've been doing that. I've been trying to talk about that now for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And much to the some people are really helped by it, and it's really illuminating, and other people do not like it at all.
And I think it saves particularly a lot of men, and I'm sure it helps women too, but it saves them from a lot of just conflict, realizing, oh, I can actually just sort of step back from this rather than get caught up into it, because I see what's happening. I see that my emotions are being manipulated, and it's sort of the differentiation that Friedman talks about. You can actually sort of take a step back and realize what's going on, and then you're not caught up in it.
Right. That's right. And I think actually, yeah, so you're right. So men need to learn it because they need to lead well, and
Right.
sober-minded leadership, which is the subject of the new book, Leadership and Emotional Sabotage, that should be releasing in the next couple of
Yeah, I
weeks.
feel like we're just sort of spilling right into.
We're just spilling right in there. So
Yeah,
leadership and
that's
emotional sabotage. I deal with empathy like in a few pages. It's not mainly about that. It's about
okay.
a broader thing, but it's in that book.
Yeah.
But that sober-mindedness is essential, which implies a kind of the right kind of boundaries, the right kind of self-governance, that God is in control of you, and then you're in control of your passions. You're not drunk on your passions. You're not letting your passions lead you astray, nor, this is the empathy question, nor are you letting other people's passions steer you. Because that's what empathy does. It puts empathy jumps in with both feet to other people's emotions and allows them to steer your emotional vehicle. And that's dangerous, wrong, and you'll get led astray. The interesting thing is I actually have had quite a few women, because women tend to be more empathetic than men by
Right.
God's design. I think it's a design feature. It's why they're great nurturers and mothers, and their ability to move towards hurting people. This is a gift from God, which means when it goes bad, it really goes bad. But one of the things that my writing on empathy, in particular for women, I've had women reach out and say it kind of relieves them of empathy overload, because the sense that they have is that they have to care about everything all the time, and it's just too much. They're not, because you're not God. You can't do that. And so the ability to say, oh, I can actually just be faithful over the things God's put me over, and not have to have this emotional investment in all of these directions, which is exhausting, debilitating, paralyzing. And so to give them permission to say, no, tether your compassion to reality, tether it to truth, tether it to Christ. Where has he put you? Tether it to him, and then be faithful there, like be compassionate there with your family, with your neighbors, with the things that God's put in front of you. It's a great relief. And what, often, husbands who can sort of help their wives do that, who can say, hey, I know that you're caring too much about what people are thinking right now. Or you're caring too much about this thing. This is not healthy. It's a burden relief, and it's a way to love other people who otherwise just get drowned by the emotions of others.
Yeah. What is this kind of, I don't know if you would say it's like a deifying of feelings, or, the idea is that if you feel it's right and should be affirmed and all that. Where did that come from? There's got to be some philosophy within the last 200 years that's really produced this.
It's probably Rousseau. We'll just blame it on him, since
that's fair.
He's a bad dude. I do think that actually probably Rousseau is at least ideologically. I do think, though, at some level, like the attempt, like humans are humans, and so the attempt to manipulate other people by emotions is as old as dirt.
Yeah.
So there's some level that I don't know. It just changes its face, and I think we've institutionalized it. We've elevated it in a certain way in the modern world. And what you said, though, is right, which is that our feelings are regarded as sort of unassailable. They're inviolable. Whatever you feel, you must be affirmed, validated, encouraged. No feeling can be wrong if it's sincerely felt or something like that. And this is just a lie. It's a subjective. It untethers our feelings from anything objective, and so you can't correct someone's feelings. You can't tell someone that they're, I don't care that you feel like a woman. You're not a woman. You're a man. Like those, like we're seeing sort of the bad fruit of that sort of mentality
Right.
in all sorts of our cultural conflagrations. If you feel a way, then it must be right. But you have to go back. You have to start with, well, what about you? Like, this is Lewis's thing, right? What about you? Do you ever use other people's pity as a steering wheel? Do you try to use your own suffering, real suffering, or imagine suffering? Do you flop and sulk and pout in order to awaken compassion, because you know if you do that, then you can get what you want. Do
Well,
you do that in your home? Do your kids do that in your home? Are other people's emotions in the driver's seat? That sort of thing starts. You got to deal with that at home first,
yeah.
and then you can work out from that and begin to address it other places.
Well, Dr. Rigney, we deal with really tough things in America, like when Starbucks is out of our favorite drink.
Right.
And so the suffering can be serious at times, and the freak out is totally, I so much of that, I don't know if that's maybe what you would give as an example for the pseudo suffering we go through. And it's like, are you serious? But,
Yeah.
but,
Right.
but it's validated. It's, well, you felt it, so therefore it is real.
Exactly.
If only somebody would write a book on, leadership and being able to handle emotional sabotage in light of these issues we're dealing with.
If only. I'll see if I can get on that. Maybe it'll be out next month.
Maybe
Yes.
Canon will publish it.
I think they will.
So what's the goal with the new book?
Yeah, the new book is basically recognizing that we live in a time in which we feel the kind of angst and agitation around us, sort of like it's in the air. It's a palpable sense that it's a powder keg, light a match, it's going to go off. There's fumes in the air.
Yeah, true.
There's a guy, a rabbi and family counselor named Edwin Friedman, who died in the 90s, who wrote a book called A Failure of Nerve, which a lot of folks like. It's about leadership.
Yeah.
And I have been really influenced by it, but was dissatisfied with certain elements. He's not a Christian.
Right.
He's, evolutionary, this, that, and the other, all the way down.
Yeah.
And he uses a lot of psychological jargon that can be helpful if you're got the right audience, but can be a barrier with other people. And so I said he's really putting his finger on a lot of problems and proposing even some really good solutions from a common grace perspective. He is a rabbi, so he has some sort of biblical ruts in his mind. I think Old Testament's kind of there, but it needs to be rooted and grounded and appropriated in more biblical soil. So I basically took a lot of some of the things he said, and I've been doing this for years in classes and teaching and things, and said, okay, what's the biblical language for this sort of thing? And so that's where the language of sober-mindedness became really central for me as sort of a key leadership quality, which is not being drunk on other people's passions. It's having a clarity of mind, a stability of soul, a readiness to act. These are sort of the key elements of sober-mindedness that allow you to absorb all of the angst in the air, to be, when the dominoes start falling, emotional dominoes start falling, they hit you, and rather than amplifying them and sending them back into the system and making it worse by bringing your own reactions and passions, and you blow up or you shut down or you get angry or you get upset or whatever, rather than doing that, you're the place where it stops and you absorb it. And then you're able to not just sort of absorb it like a bump on a log, but to kind of step back in with calmness, with steadiness, with intentionality, and lead. That's what I think homes need, churches need, the world needs. And so the basic book is, what's the problem? Chapter 1, 2, sober-mindedness is sort of the solution. What is that? How does it look? Chapter 3 is the ways that people are going to try to steer you and sabotage you. So at least the 2 key ones that people use, and then apply it in the home. Chapter 4 in the church. Chapter 5 and in the world. Chapter 6, using key biblical passages at every step. So Ephesians 5 and 6 for the home. Galatians 2 and Paul's confrontation with Peter in Antioch with the Gentiles, and there's conflict in the church, and there's withdrawal and separation, and what's going on there, and how does Paul lead through it? And then Paul back in Jerusalem in Acts 21, where he comes back and then a riot happens and he's got to somehow navigate this explosion of confusion in Jerusalem. Right. So that's sort of the rough outlines of the book, and it's short. It's 100 and something pages. It's not real long, and but I hope it's a helpful lens through which you can view your own leadership and your own self in relation to God and the gospel and the challenges we face today.
Sounds like it will be a great resource, not just for men to read or anyone really, but men's groups or pastors to go through
Right.
for Sunday school or something like that.
Yeah. So the idea was this is a great book for
Yeah.
elders in a church, school boards. I've gotten mine. I know that school boards get all kinds. They're trying to navigate all kinds of complexities and angst in a given school. Business leaders have to navigate some of this. Politicians have to navigate it. But everybody, your home is full of this stuff. And so to be able to think about as a husband, as a father, especially, but it's not just for men. It is like women will benefit from it because it's sober-mindedness is not a male virtue. It's like everybody, it's a Christian virtue. Everybody needs to be sober-minded.
Right.
There's a particular burden on leaders and therefore men, but even women taking care, parenting your kids, in working with other women at the church, in working in your neighborhood. Like there's all sorts of places where it's going to be really relevant for everybody.
Yeah, that's gonna be really good. I look forward. Is it pre-order already?
It's pre-order. Yeah, you can go to emotionalsabotage.com, and you can pick up a pre-order copy. They should start shipping in early March, mid-March, something like that.
Awesome. When I was watching the videos you did that I think the book is mostly based off of on the
Yes.
Canon app.
Yes.
A verse that I constantly just, you talked about men keeping a cool demeanor, a cool head. And I'm not sure if that was right in that sober-mindedness portion of the book or not, but James 1:19-20. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Right there, that's the step back, not being caught up and drawn in and everything. And then, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God.
Right.
And it just made me think of the trap men fall into where I need to be just louder. I need to assert more of my presence upon whoever it is that I'm in conflict with in order to get my way. And I just think, no. The wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God.
That's right. Yeah. That wrath is wrath, anger. That's a good example of a passion, and they're good. Passions are good. God gave them to us. So fear, pity, anger, desire, sadness. These are all normal human things, but they have to be governed. And if they're not, there's the anger of man. There's the wrath of man. But you could say the same thing, right? About the fear of man does not work the righteousness of God. The empathy of man does not work the righteousness of God. The sadness of man does not work. So all of these have there's a good version when it's governed by Jesus and directed towards the ends that he gave for it. And then there's the bad version when it goes wrong and tries to run the show. And in all cases, right, what you need is sober-mindedness. Don't get drunk on your passions.
That's awesome. That's great. I trust that probably is going to be a really great resource for many people. Yeah. A link will be down below, guys, and you guys can go check it out. And here it gave you the website, so you guys can go. I wonder if people are finding that website Googling for something else.
Right.
Okay. So another thing I really wanted to ask you about, because I know you've done, I'm not sure what work exactly you've done. I know you had some conversations with Doug Wilson many years ago on Jonathan Edwards. Now I have to admit, in some Reformed circles, he gets a bad rap. Sure. I don't know if it's just due to his association with the Great Awakening, and that's when all of this and more decisionism started, or whatever it is. When I read the guy, I can't help but really like him. And I also see the point that some are making, but what is your take? How do you sift through some of that with Edwards?
Yeah. So, I actually am an Edwards scholar. So I think that one I can officially say. So my dissertation was on Jonathan Edwards' Doctrine of God, and I've taught classes on him for years. So I have a great affection for Edwards, an appreciation for him, and yet see some shortcomings in him as well. So I think the reason that some Reformed folks are nervous, some of it is that he often gets appropriated as being weird. So that his doctrine of God or his doctrine of creation is seen to be really odd and out of step with Reformed orthodoxy. And I think that's overblown. Part of my dissertation was trying to say, no, he's not. He gets used by a lot of weird people today because he is trying to speak into a different context than say the 16th, 17th century challenges in Reformed orthodoxy when guys like Turretin and William Ames and those guys are writing. They have certain challenges. They're often arguing with papists and really going to town on that sort of thing. By Edwards' day, you've got a lot of deists, you've got a lot of moral philosophers who think they can sort of cut off the root of biblical Christianity from ethics. There's the Enlightenment that's kind of underway. And so Edwards is speaking to that context and therefore trying to adapt the language and address using the Reformed tradition, using the you know, using the Reformed tradition, but to speak it into a different context with different philosophical challenges. And so because of that, he gets used in ways that I think are illegitimate. I think in many ways, he's just a standard, he's a creative, but a standard Reformed theologian. But I can understand why people get nervous. And part of my job when I've written, but my task when I've been writing on him is to kind of correct that and say, it's fine. He's on the side with the good guys. I do think the other thing though, is that the Great Awakening has a mixed reputation. On the one hand, it really does seem to be, a lot of good things came from it, the work of God. At the same time, there was a second Great Awakening, which was a little bit gnarlier and which appealed to it. And therefore parts of the awakening got picked up. One of Edwards's main things he's doing throughout his life, he wrote like 5 different books on revivals. And, each one kind of tracking with what's going on around him. And the main goal was, how do you tell true from false? How do you sift a work of the Spirit from a counterfeit work of the devil? Because he really believed that if God is doing something, 5 minutes later, the devil will be there doing the copycat to try to draw people away. And so how do you tell? And I think he actually is really, really shrewd on a lot of this. There are some places where I think he can be a little too, I don't know if this is maybe a caricature of Puritanism, but the caricature has real features to it. The introspective, inward focus of, being so granular that, basically if you feel like you're being humble, go check again. And if you say, yep, I'm being humble, go check again, because now you're probably being proud in your humility. And then if you catch yourself there, well, you better go check again, because you're probably being proud that you knew that you were being proud, and you just get in that endless loop. And there's parts of his writing that kind of lend themselves to that. So I think that there are things that, like all authors, sift them. But overall, the thing that I take away from Edwards every time is God is ultimate. God is supreme, and he's real. So, George Marsden in his biography of Edwards has a great quote. He says, if you ever read Edwards and you're bothered by something or puzzled by something, just ask yourself this question. What if you really believed that God was God, right? And that everything came from him and could be traced back to him. Like, if you really believe that all the way down, he said, when you reframe it that way, a lot of what Edwards is doing will make sense. He's just taking that seriously. Wow. At every point to try to, and that's good. Like we ought to, that's reality. We ought to take God that seriously.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah. That's really good. That's really good info on Edwards. I was not tracking. Is your dissertation available somewhere?
I'm sure you can probably, maybe there's like a database somewhere. I know I had to submit it to something. Right. And then, I'm trying to think, there's probably some articles. I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
Where you could, it's Edwards' Doctrine of Divine Attributes is basically what I did.
I'll do some digging, maybe
poking around.
One of the things I remember reading, and just the first time I read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, the caricature of that is always just the fire and brimstone. Right. Funny how people leave out the whole long ending of begging people to come to Jesus.
Right.
And receive forgiveness and all that. It's like, people conveniently leave this part out and love just casting a shadow over him.
Right.
But he wanted people to love Christ. That was it.
He believed in hell. And so he said, I got to preach it.
Please. Yeah. Okay. If you could force, I'm just going to throw this quick question. If you could force either all pastors or all men, I guess you could pick the group to read one book. This is a must, you have to.
Oh gosh.
What would you say it would be?
It's probably something by Lewis. Right. One book, golly. I don't know if I've got just one because there are just so many good books.
3.
Maybe actually, okay, I might say Pleasures of God by Piper.
Okay.
That's probably my favorite Piper book.
All right.
And because of it just exalts in who God is and what does God love? We should love that too. And it's just a rich, theologically rich. Yeah, so I think that I'm hesitant, one book, right? But that would be at the top. That would be up there.
Is that everybody, or like if it was pastors, like for you to do well as a man in the ministry?
Yeah. I think actually, especially for pastors, I would say, hey, remember, this is
Okay.
like everything has to come out of this. This is what's under your feet and in your heart is
Right.
What does God love? What does God delight in? And he's an overflowing fountain of joy, and he invites you in various ways. And so, yeah, I'm happy with that answer.
Okay, there we go. Fantastic. All right. Well, Dr. Rigney, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure being able to talk to you and talk through all this stuff. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
All right, guys, make sure that you check out everything in the description below, all the links to Dr. Rigney's books and all that stuff, everything we've been talking about. But until next time, take hold and reorder creation by first reforming your home. And this has been the Reformed Reset.
But on the basis of grace and on the finished work of Jesus Christ, the project is back and forth, and the destiny of a new transformed world is assured.
I just put the sourdough in the oven too, so I've got like 40 minutes.